Hello, welcome to Z Murray Design. Let's create a Scrappy fall table runner. So I chose some 6.5-inch squares from my scraps, and my inspiration came from these leaves that I had in my stash. And I also found a few focal fabrics that were fall related, and then I just chose other fall colors in my stash that are 6.5-inch squares. You can use any size squares for this. Mine just happened to be 6.5 inches. So I had two focal fabrics that were in my color scheme, and one of my focal fabrics just happened to have fall motifs on it. So I measured my table, and I want my table runner to be at least 60 inches long by at least 24 to 25 inches wide. So I lay out all of my squares, and I'm going to lay them out with about 11 squares in length, and I want 4 rows for each of those. So I'm just trying to choose my squares at random, but I want to make sure that my focal fabrics are in each of my rows. And I have 4 rows. So now that I have all of my rows laid out, I'm going to stack those up. So when I go to the sewing machine, they're already in the stack of the way that I want them to be in my rows. And if you wanted to do an entire tablecloth, you can use the same technique, just have more rows and more squares in your row to make it longer and to make it wider. So I take 4 rows over to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew these right sides facing. I will take one right sides facing, sew 1/4 inch seam allowance, press it over. Again, right sides facing, 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I'll just continue to do that until each of my row is completed. So I have 4 rows all sewn. I'm going to press those seams. On the first row, I'll press the seams to the right, the second row, the seams to the left, third row, the seams to the right, and the fourth row, the seams to the left, because I want those seams to nestle inside each other when I sew the rows together. So I will turn those rows right sides facing, and I'm going to make sure that each of those seams on those 6.5-inch squares, that they match up with each row, just so it'll be a nice clean finish. And then I will continue to pin in between, and I'll sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I sewed row 1 to row 2, and I sewed row 3 to row 4. I pressed my seams down, And now I will sew those 2 rows together. Again, making sure to match those seams. Put a pin there first, and then I fill in with all the rest of the pins. But I make sure to match those seams first. And then sew 1/4 inch seam allowance. And now my table topper is all sewn together. I'm going to press that row up. Then I'm going to create a quilt sandwich, and the backing part of my quilt sandwich is going to be this beige muslin, and I'm going to tape it down, tape it to the floor first because I want to make sure that it doesn't shift in all 4 corners and on each of the centers. I'm going to put a piece of cotton muslin batting, and then I'll put my table topper on top of that, and then I will pin all 3 of those layers together. So I have the muslin as the backing, my cotton batting, 100% cotton, and then my table topper. Now you don't necessarily have to use the batting, but I'm going to do the appliquing of the leaves, so I want it to have some stability. And then I'm going to pin the topper together to be able to take it to the sewing machine without it shifting. So I just trimmed a bit of the sides from the muslin and from the batting, just so I don't have a lot of bulk when I take it to the sewing machine. And then I'm going to sew diagonally. I'm going to use a decorative stitch to sew diagonally. And I also stitched in the ditch horizontally, and I stitched in the ditch vertically on each of those rows. Now you don't have to use a decorative stitch for the cross stitch. You can just use a straight stitch, but I also used my walking foot to make sure that the layers didn't shift underneath. And I took out my pins as I did all of that quilting. You can see what it looks like there from the back. And then I did a stay stitch all the way around the edge of this topper. All the way around each of the sides. So now I'm ready to trim off the batting and trim off that backing fabric, and to square up this table topper. I'm going to put my ruler on the bottom of the bottom square and match it up with the side seam, and then just trim. And I'm just pulling it down so that I can reach the cutting. But if you have it on a floor or a larger table, then you wouldn't have to move it like that. And then I just match up the bottom part there level that I've already cut, and then I just continue to trim it off. Put my fingers to the outside of the ruler to make sure that the ruler doesn't shift as I'm doing my cutting. Now once I'm at the top, I'm going to make sure that one of the lines on my ruler matches the top of that top square, and then make sure that I'm matching the part of the topper that I've already cut with the side, and then just continue to trim. One side is all trimmed up. And I'll just continue to do this until all sides of this table topper is all trimmed. And this is the same technique that you would do if you were making a quilt, to square up your quilt once you have completely quilted the project. Now that my topper is completely trimmed, I'm going to choose the layout for my leaves. And before I put my leaves on, I'm going to put the Tablerunner fusible web onto the backs of those leaves, and then fuse each of those leaves to one of my squares. I'm trying to place these leaves on some of the solid color squares and not on my focal fabrics. But as I began to place them, I realized that I didn't have enough leaves. It looked a bit sparse. So I'm going to make more leaves. So I just printed off free printables from the internet, and then I'm going to put that onto my light box. You don't necessarily have to have a light box to do this if you can see your printable, or you can put it on a window too so you can see it better. And now I'm going to trace those onto the back of my fusible web there. I'm going to trace on the paper side and not on the web side. The web side has a little bumpy feel, and then you can feel the paper side is nice and smooth. So with my marker, I'm going to trace each of these leaf shapes. And I'm not trying to be really careful when I do this, to trace this, because leaves in nature, as we know, they're not perfect. So I just do a rough tracing around each of these leaf shapes. Once I have each of my leaves traced onto my fusible web, I'm just going to do a rough cut around each of these leaf shapes. And then I'll follow the manufacturer's instructions, and I will press each of these leaf shapes onto the fusible. I'll press that onto the back of a piece of scrap fabric that I have. So I'll press it to the wrong side of each fabric piece that I have. And once it's been pressed and it's cooled down, I'm going to now cut it on the line. And again, not being oh so careful. I just want to make sure that I have a basic leaf shape. And I'll just do this to the backs of several of my fall colors of scrap fabrics. And so I have a various amount, and after I've cut it all out, I will remove that backing. I just take a pin and I just score that paper, and then I pull the paper off, and you can feel your fusible. You can see it also, it's a little shiny. And now it's ready to be fused to your fabric. And then I'm ready to fuse these throughout the quilt. And I even have some leaf shapes that I had cut from some other fabric that was already printed. Leaf prints, and I'm going to also I cut that out to trace it onto my fusible and cut that shape out as well. And then I'll just place them all throughout the table topper, and we'll fuse those down. And this is just some fabric scraps that I had that I fused some of those leaf shapes to the backs of those as well. Now I have quite a few leaves that I have cut out, so I'm fusing them all throughout. And then I had a few trees or bushes that I had from my stash from a previous project. You see that green one there that I also added to the quilt, to the topper, the quilt topper. These are all fused down, so now I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to use a free motion. And I'm going to free motion around each of these leaves. So now I'm at my sewing machine, and I have my BSR foot, my Bernina stitch regulator, but if you don't have that, just use your regular quilting foot or darning foot, and we're going to free motion. Just make sure that your feed dogs are dropped, and I rolled this quilt topper up on each side. I'm going to drop my needle and bring my bobbin thread up to the top, just so I don't get any nestles of thread on the bottom. And now I'm going to use a zigzag stitch. And I'm going to free motion zigzag around the edge of each of these leaves. Just that will help to prevent any fraying, because since this is going to be a table topper, and I made this just in time for Thanksgiving in case any gravy or cranberry sauce or anything got onto it, I'd have to put it in the laundry. I didn't want it to fray. So that's why I'm using a zigzag stitch all around. And I'm not trying to be really oh so careful going around this. I'm just trying to make sure that I get to the edge. So if I miss a spot, I just go back over it and just continue to go all the way around the outside edge of each of these leaves. So once I'm back at the beginning, which is the stem part of the leaf, I'm going to switch to a straight stitch. And now I'm going to come up and I'm going to create veins throughout each of these leaves. I'm going to first, and again, I'm still on my free motion. I'm going to come up and I'll go back down that same straight stitch, and then I'll create my veins to the left, to the right. And this is very intuitive. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You could put as many veins as you want, 2, 3, it doesn't matter. And again, I'm using the straight stitch for this part. And I just try to stay on that center line that I created, that center vein. If I got off, it was okay. And some of those center veins, I kind of curved them just to add a bit more interest. And then creating those side veins on this leaf, following that center vein line and making the sides. And you'll be able to see it a lot more clear once I'm done. You'll be able to see what it actually looks like. And then I cut my thread after I completed each of those leaves, and then I just move on to the next leaf and do the same thing. And it didn't matter the leaf shape. I did this exact same technique with each leaf shape. I did the zigzag free motion stitch all the way around the outside. Now, if you don't have that option on your machine to do a zigzag stitch free motion, you can always zigzag stitch with just a regular foot, or you can just opt to do the straight stitch with your free motion foot. And I'm just putting on my quilting gloves just to make it easier for me to move around each of these shapes. as I do my free motion. You can get a bit better look here at how I created those veins and how I did the free motion zigzag around each of these leaves. So now it's on to putting on the binding, and again I'm just using some scrap fabric, 2.5 inches in width. I folded in half, I connected it on the diagonal, then to start by leaving a 10-inch strip, and then I'll sew all the way down to the bottom, making sure that I miter my corners, turning it to the back, and I do a straight stitch all the way around. I'll leave a link in the description below as to how to put this binding on if you've never put a binding on. And my fall Scrappy table runner is all complete. I'll show you what it looks like on my table after I do my table setting. And this is what it looks like from the back with all the quilting that's on there, from the decorative stitches to the free motion. And as you can see, the length of my table, I have about maybe 4 inches from each end and about maybe 4 inches from each side after I put it on top of my tablecloth. And then I had some other fall leaves that I just kind of sprinkled throughout. They were silk fabric leaves, and just put some candles and put some other focal foliage on the table. And our fall table runner is all ready to go. So I hope you like this project, and I hope you'll give it a try. Thanks for watching.